My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32, and I run the numbers for a mid-sized logistics company in Denver. 10 days before my wedding, my future mother-in-law called me while I was parked outside a grocery store, engine still running, and told me the $60,000 they'd promised for our venue was gone. Not delayed. Gone. Redirected to bail out her son's Fiancé's struggling car dealership. She didn't hesitate. She didn't apologize. She said, "That's your issue now," and hung up before I could even ask how much had already been spent. What happened over the next 9 days ended with Adam's father standing outside a lakeside chapel in Colorado, holding a check nobody wanted, asking me not to cancel a wedding he'd already tried to cancel himself. By then, the decision had already been made, just not the one he was hoping for. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This channel tells stories about women who stopped carrying what was never theirs, and what happens to the people who assumed they always would. If you've ever been promised something and handed a bill instead, this story is yours too. Adam and I met 4 years ago at a friend's barbecue in Boulder. He's the kind of guy who remembers everyone's name and tips to generously charming in the effortless way that makes people forgive him things. His parents, Richard and Diane Colt, own Colt Auto Group, 3 dealership lots strewn along the interstate outside Denver. Richard built it from a single used car lot in the 80s. Diane keeps the books, were used to, before I quietly started catching her errors 2 years into dating their son. The dealership had been bleeding money since a bad expansion into a fifth lot in Fort Collins. I knew this because I'd seen the spreadsheets Adam left open on his laptop, not snooping, just noticing, the way I notice everything. Inventory financing costs climbing. A balloon payment on equipment loans due in the fall. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my business, and in the Colt family, you didn't bring up money at dinner unless you were announcing you'd made some. 6 months ago, at Sunday dinner, Richard stood up with his wine glass and announced they were covering our venue in full, the Aspen Ridge Lodge. $60,000, the wedding you deserve. Diane squeezed my hand under the table. I remember feeling, for the first time since meeting them, like I actually belonged at that table instead of just being tolerated at it. I should have asked why a family with a balloon payment coming due was suddenly writing 6-figure checks for a wedding. I didn't. I wanted to believe them. Aspen Ridge required deposits paid in stages, and Richard insisted on handling everyone himself. $12,000 for the venue hold, $8,000 to the caterer, $4,000 to the photographer and florist combined. $24,000 down, $36,000 left in final balances, almost all of it due the final 2 weeks before the wedding. That's how these venues work. Nobody warns you. At the tasting in April, I gently suggested Richard let me co-sign the contracts, just so there'd be a backup if anything ever came up. He waved it off, laughing. "Colts don't need backups, sweetheart. Just enjoy being the bride." So the contracts stayed in his name, billing went to his address, and I filed the discomfort away instead of pushing it. Quietly, though, I opened my own savings account and started feeding it bonuses. Over time, the vacation fund I never touched. By September, it held $18,000. I told no one, not even Adam. Then, in August, Adam brought home news at dinner. The Fort Collins lot needed emergency capital or they'd lose the lease entirely. Richard went quiet in a way I recognized from balance sheets that didn't reconcile. 2 weeks later, meetings with the bank became a permanent fixture on Richard's calendar. Diane stopped returning my texts about seating charts. When I called about the final vendor deadlines, Richard's answers turned identical, word for word. "It's handled." A Colt keeps his word. I believed him. I had 32 years of evidence that Colts paid their bills. I just hadn't checked which ledger I'd been filed under. 10 days out, Diane called while I sat in my car outside the grocery store. The $60,000, we had to move it. The Fort Collins lease needed it more than a party does. "That's your issue now." She hung up before I finished the question. I didn't cry. I called the venue. The deposit hold expired in 6 days. After that, a corporate retreat would take our date. I called my own account, 18,000 against 36 needed. Not enough until my sister, Megan, who'd married into a family that actually threw money at weddings instead of borrowing it, called back within the hour. "Bring it to the ranch," she said. "Dad's been dying to use that barn for something." No hesitation, no invoice implied. 6 days of work, Megan's in-laws clearing their event barn, neighbors hauling folding chairs, My 18,000 finally spent on people who answered the phone. Richard showed up anyway, gray suit, envelope in hand, $36,000 he'd clawed back after the Fort Collins deal fell through on its own. Take it. Come back to the family, he said at the chapel door. I looked at the envelope, then at him. Keep it, Richard. Fund the lot. I already paid for my own wedding with people who didn't need to be asked twice. I walked back inside without it. Some fathers learn the hard way that love wasn't supposed to come itemized. Richard's still learning. I stopped waiting for him to finish the lesson,